Hi guys, welcome back to the web. Today we're gonna look at the year in review. Basically, it's what happened throughout the year of 2020. Oh boy, it's an interesting year. So, since March, Americans have been flooded with news around the coronavirus. The US was hit with several grim milestones as daily cases and death rates rose, and the COVID 19 pandemic changed the way Americans work, vote, learn, and socialize. But amid the deadly pandemic were other crises that left a mark on 2020. Interesting, let's see, including civil unrest, terrorist acts, White House resignations and firings. Oh boy. And natural disasters that devastated land and claimed lives. Here are the stories that define 2020. And oh boy, let's start out with January. The year began with international tensions on January 3. I remember this shit. Iranian General Qasem Soleimani died during a military airstrike unleashed by American forces. His death prompted a series of efforts out of Tehran, the capital of Iran, to retaliate against the United States. I remember this, and the year was great. Somewhat started off a little bit rough. Let's continue. The efforts continued into June when Tehran said President Donald Trump engaged in murder and terrorist acts. At the time, the capital put Trump and other figures on red notice and urged Interpol to help detain him. As the tension unfolded, the United States became aware of its first coronavirus case, marking the start of the US response to the pandemic. Oh boy. The rabbit hole. We're down this rabbit hole. Then, basketball legend Kobe Bryant died in a tragic helicopter crash on January 26. Yeah, it was sad, it really was. Americans were shocked at the announcement of his death. Yeah, I was shocked, which raised questions on how to grieve a beloved figure who had been accused of sexual assault. Technically, come on, seriously, the sexual assault thing. All right, let's leave that out. In February, let's start by the 5th. On the 5th of February, the Republican-controlled Senate cleared Trump of 2 impeachment charges. Yeah, remember they were trying to impeach him from the year before, 2019? Remember that, folks? Bringing to an end of months-long process to remove him from office. He was impeached in December on abuse of power and obstruction of Congress charges. Bam. Man, the year started off rough. And that was just February. The decision to clear him of the first charge largely fell along party lines in the Senate, with every Democrat and independent senator and Republican Senator Mitt Romney voting to convict Trump. The rest of the Republican senators voted to acquit. On the second charge, lawmakers, his votes fell entirely along party lines, with Democrats voting to pin the obstruction of Congress charge and Trump and Republicans voting to clear him. Republicans who maintain a Senate majority won. One day after the vote, news of the first American who died from the coronavirus spread. I remember that day. I remembered a 60-year-old was the first American reported to die from the disease. I tell you. Now, March. We're on to March now. Super Tuesday on March 3 led thin out the list of more than 24 candidates vying for president at the time. Now President-elect Joe Biden came out strong with more than 63% of the vote. Following him was Senator Bernie Sanders, who had a little over 16% of the vote. After the results came out, Mike Bloomberg dropped out of the race and endorsed Biden. Senator Elizabeth Warren also ended her campaign. Throughout the rest of March primaries, Biden continued to score big as a handful of presidential candidates ended their bids. March also marked a shift from government officials to take the pandemic seriously. State and local officials in the U.S. began initiating lockdown orders to curb the spread of the coronavirus. By the end of March, more than a third of the world had entered some form of lockdown. On March 11, the World Health Organization officially recognized the coronavirus outbreak as a pandemic. I remember that. That was horrible. And on March 13, Trump declared the coronavirus pandemic a national emergency. 2 weeks later, Trump signed a $2 trillion stimulus package that included 1,200 direct payments to Americans. Also on March 13, Breonna Taylor was shot dead by police in her own home, an event that incited months-long Black Lives Matter protests that continued this day. When she was shot, I wasn't aware of that until months later. That's so sad. Now, April. Throughout the month of April, many Americans staged protests to defy the orders. I remember that. Trump was among those supporting these movements, pushing for a quick return to normal and urging state officials to reopen businesses to prop up the economy. The April jobs report from the Labor Department said 14.7% of Americans are unemployed. Shit. About 20 million jobs were lost. That's horrible. And we're still feeling it. May. Early in the month, reports came out of a new challenge. Murder hornets. Oh, shit. Yep. The murder hornets. Who could forget that? In May. Oh, man. When that shit came out, I was like, what's next? The aliens? Oh, boy. We still have a few days left. Let's see. They're officially called the Asian giant hornet, or Vespa mandarinia. Murder hornets are 2-inch insects that have killed humans in the past. Near the end of the month, on Memorial Day, a Minneapolis police officer knelt on the back of George Floyd's neck. Oh, this happened in March as well. Oh, sorry, in May as well. My bad. This happened in May. Wow. It's horrible. So, Minneapolis police officer knelt on the back of George Floyd's neck, a black man who died after being restrained for several minutes. His death reignited the Black Lives Matter protests that began earlier in the year after the death of Breonna Taylor. Derek Chauvin, the officer who knelt on Floyd's neck, was later charged with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter. That incident was horrible. Now in June, protests continued into June with waves of people both nationally and worldwide turning out against police brutality and racial injustice. While largely peaceful, some protests turned violent and dangerous, with law enforcement using force against demonstrators or rioters. Meanwhile, Biden had secured enough delegates to formally clinch the title of Democratic presidential nominee. Up until this point, he had been the party's presumptive nominee. In July, Americans were barred from going to or staying in Europe. Oh, I remember that. The European Union regarded U.S. citizens as too risky to admit because of soaring coronavirus cases in the United States. The full list of admitted countries comprised of Algeria, Australia, Canada, China, Georgia, Japan, Montenegro, Morocco, New Zealand, Rwanda, Serbia, South Korea, Thailand, Tunisia, and Uruguay. Back home, racial tensions continued to spike protests. Protesters ardently demanded the removal of Confederate monuments, and local and state officials complied. The U.S. lost civil rights icon John Lewis, who served in the House of Representatives since 1987. He was part of the original Freedom Riders, a group of civil rights activists who protested segregated bus terminals. As in July, the FBI arrested Ghislaine Maxwell, the longtime girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, charging her with participation in the abuse of young girls. Epstein was facing sex trafficking charges until he died by suicide in jail. His accusers named Maxwell as a person who facilitated the sex trafficking by grooming young girls to sleep with men with Epstein's orbit. That's horrible. Let's move to August. After months of speculation on who his potential running mate would be, Biden announced Senator Kamala Harris as his choice for vice president. Harris's nomination was monumental as she made history as the first Black and Asian American woman on a major party ticket. On August 23, Kenosha, Wisconsin, police repeatedly shot Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, in the back. During the shooting, Blake's kids were in the back of the door, and one of them had been celebrating a birthday. Blake was hospitalized with serious injuries. Oh my. Protests erupted in Kenosha, Shortly after the shooting, police enact a curfew in response to the demonstrations. September, Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on September 18 from pancreatic cancer and left a vacancy on the Supreme Court bench. A few days before her death, she asked that she not be replaced until a new president is installed. Contrary to her wishes, lawmakers immediately began to plan for Ginsburg's replacement. Trump's choice was Amy Coney Barrett, a conservative Catholic who evaded questions about key issues during her confirmation hearings. The decision spurred protests and stern words of discontent, from which originated from Barrett's former class peers. Trump also received backlash on the day of the first presidential debate between him and Biden. When asked to denounce white supremacists, Trump told the Proud Boys, a far-right extremist hate group, to stand back and stand by. The group celebrated Trump's remark and took it as commanding order. September was also the month when a grand jury declined to charge two of the three officers involved in the shooting of Breonna Taylor. One officer, Barrett Hankison, was charged with 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment. October. Trump on October 2 announced that he and First Lady Melania have both tested positive for the coronavirus. Trump was transported to the Walter Reed Medical Center, where he stayed for a few days before being released. "Don't be afraid of COVID," he tweeted. Just ahead of leaving the hospital. At this time, the country was facing tremendous spikes in confirmed cases, and by early October, more than 30 White House aides, officials, and various other staff members tested positive for the coronavirus. Meanwhile, the country was beginning to cast ballots by mail for the November presidential election. Most states have shifted to voting by mail this year to limit the spread of the coronavirus. November, Business Insider called the presidency for Biden on November 6, but for weeks afterward, Trump refused to concede the results. He released a statement accusing Biden of rushing to falsely pose as the winner. After dozens of news outlets projected the former vice president to have won the election, Biden won with a sweeping 306 electoral votes to Trump's 232. Trump also unleashed a series of legal challenges alleging widespread voter fraud in multiple states. He hasn't won any of them. As election litigation pended in the courts, coronavirus spikes continued. The U.S. death toll increased by tens of thousands within a span of weeks, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University. Health officials encourage Americans to celebrate Thanksgiving virtually, but a record-breaking 1.1 million travelers skirted the guidance and flew home after the holiday weekend. December. The FDA authorized the use of various vaccines, which were immediately shipped out to every state in the country. Congress continued to debate the contents of the next stimulus package until finally striking a deal on November 20, just ahead of the Christmas holiday. It's a $900 billion rescue package that issues $600 in direct payments to Americans. But in the final days of 2020, Trump struck down the bill, urging Congress to increase direct payments to $2,000. As a result, the stimulus relief package remains in limbo. Also in December, the Trump administration was ordered to reinstate DACA, the Obama-era program that protects young undocumented immigrants from deportation. Trump has fought to do away with the program, and this decision from a federal judge was a blow to his plan. Wow, an interesting year. Very interesting. And this is the year in review from the web. From January straight up to December. And oh boy, this pandemic is a wreck. It's a monster. Let's see what 2021 brings. Thanks, guys, for listening.